Okay, we're talking about your biography project and the next steps. So we have already introduced the big picture. You have drafted your questions and done your interview. So now we're talking about what you are actually writing up, which is a biography, a story, or kind of like a summary of your person and what they said. Your focus is the questions that you were assigned to ask for quarter two, which is about their childhood and teen years. So these are the questions. So you were provided lots of different questions, and you were able to choose 6 and write your own, and we talked about those in class. So what you're going to do is you're not going to be writing up like a question and answer. You're going to be writing up a summary, okay? When you're done, your summary is going to introduce your person. It's going to have lots of relevant facts from the interview, and it's going to be a distinct voice that enhances the story. It's going to include quotes or specific stories, and it's going to tell like as much as you can using the recording. It's not necessarily going to be a question and answer. That would not actually be a biography. If you read biographies or look at any of the ones that we used in class as examples, we use examples of how they told it in a story. Like the first story that we read was the one about Lincoln in a photobiography. Basically, it's a biography with a few pictures. So they talked about him. Abraham Lincoln was not the sort of person who'd lose himself in a crowd. After all, he stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, and to top it off, he wore a high silk hat. So they give us an introduction, and they paint us a picture, but they tell it to us in different ways. At first glance, most people thought he was homely. Lincoln thought so too, referring once to his, quote, quote, poor, lean, lank face. As a young man, he was sensitive about his gawky looks, but in time he learned to laugh at himself. Then the author goes on to show that when a rival called him two-faced during a political debate, Lincoln replied, I leave it to my audience. If I had another face, do you think I'd wear this one? Which is an example of a story that shows us his sense of humor about him. So it gives some background. And then chapter 2. Abraham Lincoln never liked to talk about his early life. A poor backwoods farm boy, he grew up swinging an axe on a frontier homestead in Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois. That's really an example of kind of the overall author statement, kind of like a claim or just a topic sentence into the introduction of the chapter. Then it goes on to the basics. He was born near Hodgenville, Kentucky on February 12, 1809, in a log cabin with one window, one door, a chimney, and a hard-packed dirt floor. His parents named him after his pioneer grandfather. The first Abraham Lincoln had been shot dead by hostile Indians in 1786 while planting a field of corn in Kentucky wilderness. And then it talks about he remembered the bright waters of Knob Creek as it tumbled past the Lincoln cabin and disappeared into the Kentucky hills. Once he fell into the rushing creek and almost drowned before he was pulled up by a neighbor boy. Another time he caught a fish and gave it to a passing soldier. Lincoln never forgot the names of his first teachers, who ran a windowless log schoolhouse 2 miles away. It was called a blab school. Pupils of all ages sat on rough wooden benches and followed their lessons out. Abraham went there with his sister Sarah, who was 2 years older, and when they could spare from their chores at home. Their parents couldn't read or write at all. Abraham's mother, Nancy, signed her name by making a shakily drawn mark. Then it talks about the different things. So then it jumps to 1816 when Thomas decided to pull the stakes and move north to Indiana. Abraham was 7. He remembered the 100-mile journey as the hardest experience of his life. The family set out on a cold morning in December, loading their possessions into 2 horses. They crossed the Ohio River on a makeshift ferry, traveling through towering forests, then hacked a path through the tangled underbrush until they reached their new home site near the backwoods community of Little Pigeon Creek. So then it talks about the development and how he struggled and then developed as a kid. It's not going to tell every single piece of information, but it's going to highlight the things that were most important to Abraham Lincoln as he was growing up. So your goal is to do the same thing. Highlight the most important things that your subject talked about. If it was about the school days and growing up in whatever school, then highlight that. Expand on that information. Maybe school was really great for them. Maybe school was really hard. Talk about that. Maybe they had a really easy childhood. So then talk about what were the ways that it was super fun and super positive. It says here that one of the other ways that you're going to get your exemplary points, it makes sense chronologically. So in your biography, basically still, even though you introduce your person in the beginning, it then goes back to the beginning and goes from the earliest memories to the later memories. Even if it's childhood, you go from being born to being 13 or being born to 12, whatever that time period that your subject talked about. You provide plenty of context or background information, so you don't just jump around, you develop the story with transitions. Again, it says here, in 1816, Thomas decided to pull up the stakes and again moved North Indiana, and then they talk about the move. So they give us a warning, they're going to move, and then they explain that movement. Writing a piece, a biography, is not that much different from writing. You can use dialogue. If there's a funny quote that your subject had, then use that dialogue. Use, or my mother, my grandmother remembers hearing from her mother, like a quote that they remember hearing. That is, another way to show and not tell. And then when you're done, whenever you're done with whatever you've done, you're going to have a conclusion. And, maybe it's, I've learned, but my grandpa's life has been something that was really enriching. Maybe your grandma moved around a lot as a child. So, Betty Lou's life as a child, who was a super positive experience despite moving around a lot. So, again, what is it that you've, not that you necessarily need to learn, but what can you draw conclusions about? What are the major themes that are going on throughout the piece? Themes being major ideas or kind of like a lesson. What are you learning about without necessarily saying, I've learned? Please make sure that you use consistent verb tense. If you're talking in the present as if that person is living that time period, then make sure you stay in that present moment. If you're doing the past, Betty Lou did, Abraham Lincoln did, then that's fine. But don't then just jump into and she says this to her parents when she's age 2, because that would be inconsistent. Okay, standards met, the difference is the length. It provides some context of information, but it may be missing parts and jumping around, not really thorough and conclusive. But, that making progress is really the organization isn't there. It doesn't use transition words to really clue you into what's going on. And being really successful. This doesn't need to be, as long as a typical biography, but we want this to be a really good length. And we want to make sure that it's, is strong and you have something that is, really significant for what you are writing. And then at the end, we'll have put it together for, the whole time. So it'll end up being really great and really thorough. For example, this, this one was a really nice claim. My grandmother on my mom's side has been living for 65 years, and parts of her youth are pretty interesting. So that was a really nice way to introduce. This one was, since he wasn't a kid to when he is and is an adult, the standard of living has changed in the way that there has been so much less modern day technology. So that one was, this one introduced, this summary is about my great-grandma Evelyn Rudin. This is all about her adult years. So that one was from the adult years section. But at least it gave us a clue about where they were. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways that you can introduce these subjects and ways that you can make it effective. This one was pretty much basic. My grandmother, Ruth, was born July 16th, 1941 in Rochester, New York. She lived with her mom, dad, and 2 other brothers, one who was 15 years older. And then, she does quote, she says, "My brother dying was far the biggest hardship of my whole life. My whole family, including me, was never the same after that." And then they said they always put her needs before theirs and took care of her. Ruth says, "Every time I was sick as a little girl, my mother would stay by my side the whole day and take care of me." So then they talk about the values. Her mom and dad were both very smart, so academics were important to her family. She always liked school and got very good grades. She wanted to be successful and make her family proud. And so those are some ways that hopefully will help you if you're struggling to kind of come up with the expectations. This is another really great one. Panny is her nickname. That's what we call her. Her grandchildren call her too. It's weird to her because we don't call her grandma or something. We call her what people have called her all her life. Panny was born August 16th, 1939. She grew up as part of the Dorr family in Charlotte, North Carolina. My grandma had a sister who was 9 years older than her. She says her sister was nice to her. Because of the age difference, her sister was like another mother to Panny. For a story to understand their relationship, at age 3, Panny demanded to wear a white cotton pinafore over her dresses. It had to be washed and ironed every day. "Want my pinafore?" she said while they were on vacation. Her mother did not want to iron it every day since they were on vacation. "If you don't stop screaming, I'm going to give you a spanking," her mother said. Then her sister said, "Oh, Panny's too sweet to get a spanking. I'll iron it, Mama." That was the kind of relationship she had with her sister. She also had a father who was a banker. He would help her with algebra because she despised algebra and was never the best at math. Her father was good with numbers, and he would try to explain it to her. An example she used was if car A starts at 4 o'clock going 30 miles an hour, and car B starts at 6 o'clock going 60 miles per hour. When do they meet up? To this kind of problem, she would say, "I don't know." When her father tried to help her convert it to X and Y, she couldn't. So that's one story of her father. Her mother was a stay-at-home mom, as many women were, and was always around for Panny. So again, she has an introduction, she has a topic sentence, and then she has a story to describe it. And that's a really successful way at doing this project. So again, we'll be around to help you and be working with you to conference with you. But your goal, if you're really confused, is hopefully to get a lot of this typed up, organized, and then polished up by December 19th.